I have a link to the original video in the comment section below.
Just gave some major airtime. Here we go. Let's just come out the gate and to get this thing.
All of us to honor the contract. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions the committee may have.
Not him. This guy's cool.
Thank you.
Ryan
Dr.
Galucci
Gade.
is awesome.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the VA disability compensation system. My testimony will differ from most you've heard. I'm a member of no veteran service organization and have no motive other than to help restore the lives and dignity of millions of veterans. For too long, you've been told that the best way to care for veterans is to shovel billions of taxpayer dollars into their pockets. This approach has resulted in a veteran class that is sicker, more marginally employed, and more suicidal than ever. By paying veterans to be sick, we create more sick veterans, separated from meaningful lives of purpose, and we deepen our suicide crisis. I developed this perspective through hard experience and long study. I was wounded in combat twice, losing my right leg and spending a year at Walter Reed. After recovery, I earned a master's degree and joined the White House Domestic Policy Council, where my previously acquired user-level experience was bolstered by my work alongside both the Joel Shalala Commission and the Scott Commission. I later completed a PhD in public policy focused on the VA claims process, and while teaching at West Point, co-led the Independence Project, a randomized control trial demonstrating the powerful link between employment and health. In 2021, I published Wounding Warriors, How Bad Policy is Making Veterans Sicker and Poorer, and recently served 2 years as Virginia's Commissioner of Veteran Services. The surge in disability claims is not due to combat injuries, but to a culture that rewards illness. Last year alone, over 450,000 new compensation recipients entered the system, while total combat wounded from the global war on terror number around 50,000. Last year, more than 270,000 veterans began receiving compensation for tinnitus, which is 100 times the number of GWAT amputees over a 20-year period. Blessedly high survival rates from combat wounds are not the cause of the growth. This lie allows advocates to tuck every veteran disability claim under a cloak of virtue. Instead, the avalanche of claims is driven by nonprofits and pay-to-play claims companies that encourage veterans to selectively exaggerate or falsify symptoms to, quote, grab all they can, end quote. Aging, genetic, and lifestyle conditions are increasingly labeled service-connected, resulting in tens or hundreds of thousands of veterans rated as 100% disabled who have no true incapacity or whose incapacity would have eventuated regardless of service status. I propose 2 principles of reform. 1, meaningful employment is powerful medicine. A 2020 paper called Employment a, quote, critical mental health intervention. Unfortunately, veteran participation in the labor market, especially among men in prime working years, is markedly lower than their civilian counterparts and has been steadily declining over the past 20 years. Disability compensation discourages work by rewarding inactivity. Some programs, like IU, create a direct barrier to work. Any separation from the labor force causes isolation, malaise, and reduced income, coupled with a demand for ever higher disability payments. We should shift dollars from paying veterans to be sick towards meaningful incentives for gaining and maintaining productive employment. Early positive incentives can have a long-lasting positive effect, as demonstrated by the Independence Project. 2, disability compensation is a destructive goal. Disability is a negative word. In Latin, dis means not, opposite of, or apart. The disability compensation system pulls veterans into a destructive identity as, quote, disabled veteran, rather than helping create a positive, forward-looking life and career. This system is anti-thriving, anti-productivity, and ultimately anti-veteran. Further, it discourages future generations serving by painting veterans as a troubled problem class. The compensation system traps veterans into a disability identity, teaching them to chase 100% rating as a proof of honor or source of validation. 9 of the top 10 conditions for newly rated veterans are easily exaggerated or totally unverifiable. We need a system that affirms veterans' capacity to thrive, not their presumed fragility. Here are several steps that would protect the integrity of the system. 1, treat but do not compensate for non-disabling conditions and eliminate conditions caused by genetics, aging, or lifestyle from the compensation rolls. Sleep apnea is one obvious example. There are hundreds of others. 2, require active treatment for compensated mental health conditions. If compensation is warranted, so is care. 3, extend VA medical eligibility to all service-connected conditions without tying it to disability ratings, removing an incentive for false claims. The current disability system robs veterans of purpose and dignity, trapping them in idleness and despair. Further, the isolation brought on by separation from the labor market can and does send many veterans into a morass of tragic consequences. Reform will be difficult. Entrenched interests protect the status quo, but it is essential. A close look at past changes shows that what survives the legislative and rulemaking process are usually additions to existing programs or the creation of new programs. The VA budget grows inexorably despite the system causing immense ongoing harm. Deep structural reform will save lives and restore what veterans truly need: meaning, work, and hope. And to Senator Tuberville, I say, War Eagle.
Okay, I can spend an hour.
This video is interesting. So kind of my perspective is he wants reform with the VA and to better serve veterans. Now, based off of this statement alone and his personal experience, I can honestly say with my personal experience, I've noticed and witnessed some of these things while getting care at the VA. The other thing people don't think about is the veterans that are being compensated, or on any level, any scale, a veteran at 10% all the way up to 100%. That is guaranteed taxpayer money going back into the economy. Now, there's always been a fight and a push to have who has, which veterans in their states. And that's guaranteed taxpayer money going back into the economy. So there is, if you were to take away and wipe the board, like the one guy said, 60% and below is just gone, that could have devastating effects on the local economies. Everyone from the small communities all the way up to the big cities. And there's always been a push, like I said, to have which veterans are where in which states, because that's guaranteed income and that's guaranteed money going back into the economy, and it's very beneficial in a lot of ways. Where you have problems are when veterans are fucking up and they're doing things they shouldn't be doing, like drinking and driving over and over and over and over again, or committing crimes, doing all these dumb fucking things. That's where you have problems. Taxpayers don't want to pay veterans to go through experimental this and that and then be committing crimes in their fucking cities, right? That just doesn't look good for anybody. Some of the narrative about combat veterans attacking non-combat veterans, I think that's a bunch of bullshit. And for combat veterans, you need to shut the fuck up, because you don't know shit when it comes, just because you're in a combat role and you got to carry guns around. And in my personal opinion, as a combat veteran, I've seen non-combat veterans that work their asses off and put their bodies on the line their entire career, going on training exercises, going to the range, all these things. It's a wear and tear on your body. You don't have to be a combat veteran to fuck yourself up for this country in the military. That's what people don't think. Not to mention the mental stress of just being in those jobs, and some of the stuff that goes on that people really don't know about is I get tired of that stereotype. Oh, you're not combat veteran. Oh, you combat veteran, blah, blah, blah. Like, go fuck yourself. So if that's the whole narrative, if someone thinks they're trying to take disability away from non-combat veterans versus combat veterans, I don't think that's a thing at all. I think that every veteran puts their bodies on the line just as much, if not, in some instances, I've seen more non-combat veterans that, probably deserve more compensation than some of the combat veterans, and that's just the truth. So again, like I said, I think that he means well, but maybe it's misguided and just needs to be corrected a little bit. That the VA system is a system that needs to be maintained and monitored and checked regularly. And that's why I try and encourage veterans as well to be a part of that system. The system's going to fail if it's neglected, and it needs people to watch over it. And
when I went through the transition assistance program when I was leaving the military, we spent about half a day on employment stuff and about a day and a half on how to file disability claims. And the proverbial little lady in tennis shoes stood up there and said, "Claim everything you can. It's free money. All you got to do is go get it." And if you have these conditions, you get this. But if you look at the DBQ carefully, and she like stomped on the floor and said, if you look at the DBQ carefully, you can see that if you have these conditions, you can get to 70%. And if you have these conditions, you can get to 100%. And so it was right there in front of people that all you have to do is exaggerate and you can get paid more. That's not actually my main problem. My main problem is what happens then. Because if a veteran is separated from the labor market, they don't work anymore. They're sitting at home, they're sitting on the couch, their wife is going to work. If it's a male veteran, the children are going to school. And what happens when those people come back home is the veteran is still sitting there. And that's a life of disempowerment, not empowerment. And men get so much identity from their work that we ought to be putting all of our effort into positive, meaningful, gainful employment, and get away from saying to everybody, hey, get everything you can from the government. All you got to do is fill out this little form and we'll give you disability payments. Thank you. The way that we talk about disability is different than any other program talks about disability. The bar is much lower. The conditions are much broader. If, and I'm not making this proposal necessarily, but if we were to take the people 60% and below in 2024 annual benefits report, and we were to say, you know what, those are conditions that we're going to treat for, but we're not going to compensate for those because they're not a disability by any other definition of the word. What you would do is you would save $20 billion a year that you could then put towards meaningful job programs. You could put towards internships and externships and education and even higher benefits for the triple amputee and the person with a traumatic brain injury. There's a way to do this that's smart and that incentivizes the right things, and that's what I'm just begging folks to focus on.
He's begging folks. Begging it. You heard it here. If you're 60% and below, your VA disability compensation is going to be deleted under this not proposal.
Now, my goal at the VA was never compensation or money. My goal was always treatment and care. And when you get out of the military, like he said, you go through a part of your out processing when you're ETSing. They recommend everyone go to the VA and file a claim or check in because you're qualified for health care when leaving the service for up to, I think at the time it was like a 5-year period where you get health care no matter what. Now, I can honestly say that there are bad actors within the VA system, and there are people that look to exploit the VA system and the compensation and the health care. And that's always been a thing, and that always will be a thing on some level. And I've watched numerous videos from other veterans that also shed light on this topic. There are people that, for example, the stolen valor community, there are people that will lie and cheat and make up all these stories to get an advantage in life or to milk the system or try and get whatever they can out of the system. Now, is his aggressive approach the answer? I'm not sure, but some of the stuff he's talking about is very true. I can personally say that there are moments, if you're getting care at the VA, where you will go through phases and you feel like you're no longer relevant or you're no longer a productive member of society. You don't have a purpose in life sometimes. You can feel that, especially if you're on pharmaceutical trials for whatever it is, TBI or depression or anything. You'll have these points where you question your life and your trajectory and where you've been and where you're going, where you're currently at. And it can be that's a very dangerous point in a person's life, I think, when you're actually. But the issues I experienced at the VA were the negligent doctors that would discount the things that were being brought to their attention on pharmaceutical trials, that they're pushing all these meds and different things onto veterans with incentive of money from these big pharmaceutical companies. And then the veterans, in a lot of instances, this could exaggerate their symptoms. This could cause all kinds of different health effects down the road, long-term and short-term health, terminal health So this is a very interesting topic because he's touching point on a lot of different things where he wants to fix the system, and I agree with some of it. There is an incentive at times where if you're paying veterans at 100% or anything really, there's less incentive for them to actually look and seek more gainful employment or anything like that. With that being said, the financial compensation that the VA is giving out to veterans isn't, in a lot of cases, it's not free money. The veterans are, in fact, a part of, in a lot of cases, experimental trials to treat their symptoms and healthcare, their health. But it is very beneficial to have a veteran in your community, especially if they're being compensated by the government, because that is guaranteed money going to small businesses and the local real estate, the everything, right? And I'm not really well versed on all economics or politics or all that stuff, but just common sense tells me, right, that it's more beneficial to have a veteran in your community than it isn't in most cases. But I do agree with his narrative of there are veterans that, and I've been through it myself when I was on that experimental drug that the doctors had me on for years, and it was causing worse side effects than anything. And there was a point in time where I was like, what is this? What is going on with my life? And what the hell is going on? This is supposed to be treatments for TBIs, and then negligence on the doctor's parts where they were ignoring symptoms that were being reported. And I do have evidence of reporting all of this stuff before things would eventually boil up and it's too late. Then what do? Right? Doctor retired. He's not an employee necessarily of the VA. He's a private, what they call them, their private contract. They contract with the VA as private practices or whatever it is. And so they retire, they pop smoke, they collect all the money from these drug companies, and that's it. The veteran is left, and the family is left to pick up the pieces. So in my humble opinion and my personal experience, I think it could be very beneficial to reform the VA system, not necessarily taking away compensation from veterans, but enabling them to seek gainful employment regardless of their disability. And I've talked about this before. You can be a disabled veteran and still work in the community. You can still have a job. It depends on your status and what your disability is. If it's TDIU, like temporary disability, individual unemployability, technically that one you're not allowed to work for a period of time. But there are disabilities that you can collect compensation because your injuries were service connected, and you deserve to be compensated for that, especially if you're going to continue healthcare and experimental treatments for all of these different injuries you received during your service. And that's what people don't think about, is it's done and they're just going to collect a check of free money the rest of it. That's not true. There's so much work that goes in on the veteran's behalf and the veteran's family that people don't think about. You're literally a guinea pig or a test rabbit for new experimental treatments within the federal government. So like I said, I agree. There should be more reform, and it's a system, like all systems, that needs to be monitored. And in my case, back in 2019, there was huge failures on behalf of the clinic here in Tennessee, in Knoxville. And so how can you do this on like the smallest level? Is just sharing your experiences and talking about it, networking with other veterans, networking with non-veterans, because there's a lot of people that work for the VA system that are really good people, and they're doing really good work for the VA, and they're not veterans, but you know what I mean? They know the system, and they're there to help. You have to forgive my scattered thoughts on this topic. It's like a lot of things in my life, it's scattered thoughts, and but it is something that a lot of people think about sometimes. And in some cases, it keeps veterans from actually doing productive things with their lives because they're scared they're going to lose their 100% or 90% or whatever it is. It keeps people disabled. When you get certain ratings it's disabling in itself. And then there's this fear that people are going to take it away from you. So you go full retard sometimes. Never go full retard, you know what I'm saying? Everybody know that. So again, I kind of agree with this dude's message about reform and repurposing veterans and enabling veterans to do good things with their lives. But I don't think it's by taking away their compensation, especially if they're getting treatment through the VA for a lot of experimental stuff sometimes. A lot of people don't realize that. But enabling them not to be scared of their compensation or disability, I agree, it has a negative context, a negative undertone. But allowing them to be compensated or receive their partial pensions, whatever you want to frickin' call it, and giving them opportunities to get out there in the community, learn a new skill. So a lot of, you know, maybe money being redirected towards work therapies and, like you said, trade schools or internships. I know a lot of veterans, including myself, we would gladly give up a lot of the stuff for an opportunity to add a good, honest career that would be, give us more purpose in life. And there's some veterans that say, screw that, I'm just gonna sit at home and that's cool with me. Some people can handle sitting at home all day, every day. Like you said, for some men, they can't handle it, and some men can, and some women can, and some can't. Now, you can do that and still find purpose in life and be a part of your community. There's volunteering, there's all kinds of things. And that's the biggest part where, like he touched on the topic of suicide, and you can feel like you're worthless. So having more access and more ability to get out there in the community and not be stuck in your house, in your head, all day, every day by yourself, would be a huge game changer for a lot of people. I wish I were better versed on this topic, but all I can do is give my own personal experience, and I have a decent amount of experience being in the VA system. Like I talked about my story from 2019, and you got to roll around the cities of different countries with guns, doing hood rat things. Like, how hard is that to do? Go do some Pogue shit, 9 to 5, and see how much you can handle that. I will say, honestly, this dude that wants to potentially take away money from veterans and disabilities, if you're going to do it you need to be thorough, and you need to make sure you know what you're doing, because a lot of veterans put in the work already to earn their compensation. Not just them, but their families that depend on it, with all the trial and error through this random med trials and the negligence of a few doctors that neglected to either get them the compensation they needed or neglected the trials that they were on with just so they can collect money from these pharmaceutical companies as what's the word for that, kickbacks or whatever, for pushing certain drugs. Policing the community is very beneficial and essential in any community. You need to watch for the people that are in fact trying to abuse the system and be reckless themselves. As a veteran, if you're going to lie and all that stuff, if you get found out, FAFO, you know what I'm saying? But the point is, you need to be precise and know what you're doing. You can't just blanket take away all these veteran stuff. And I think he knows that. And I think it is a gauge to gauge where people are at within the community.
A legislative hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say I must express disappointment in the decision to convene a legislative hearing that amplifies the Washington Post's misleading and flawed attack against the VA disability benefit system, especially by inviting a witness who supports those sentiments. And adding insult to injury, this effort to falsely depict our nation's disabled veterans as a group of dishonest fraudsters and cheaters originates from a paper that is owned by a multi-billionaire whose net worth exceeds by tens of billions of dollars the total amount that the United States government spends on disability compensation to over 6 million disabled veterans in any given year. Look, Nobody is denying the unfortunate reality that a small number of veterans exist who will dishonor their own service and that of their fellow veterans by defrauding the VA. These individuals can and should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. If we want to enhance deterrence, we should strengthen enforcement resources to increase the rates of criminal investigations, prosecutions, and convictions of these fraudsters. The mistake we must avoid is allowing a minority of criminals to dictate the redesign of the VA disability benefit system into a bureaucratic black box that is more frustrating and less fair and will leave more veterans waiting and dying, waiting to get their benefits that they've earned. Since we met many years ago at Walter Reed, I've been disappointed, Colonel Gade, in watching your journey. You and I were there together. We suffered together. We recovered together. But I have to say, I've been disappointed in watching your journey to becoming one of the leading critics of the entire concept of disability compensation for disabled veterans. And I do feel that you believe that you're simply offering our fellow disabled veterans some tough love that everyone else is too afraid to give to inspire them to achieve the success that you've been so very fortunate to earn. However, your rhetoric, particularly in downplaying the severity of the reality of the invisible wounds of war, runs the real risk of doing more harm than good. Portraying disabled veterans as a group of takers who will happily never work again for $3,100 per month is incredibly condescending and disrespectful to these heroic Americans. Disabled veterans, like any American, want to work for more than just money. They're driven by a sense of mission, purpose, and meaning. And your characterization of disabled veterans who accept disability compensation as being moochers who are trapped by the system advances a very damaging stereotype that shames many veterans into foregoing VA benefits at a cost to themselves and their loved ones. So there's an irony that the VA is being accused of being too generous, too trusting, and too focused on enhancing efficiency for disabled veterans by a paper whose owner is famous for accumulating a vast fortune by adopting a core management principle, obsessive customer focus. So my question for the VSO leaders on the panel is simple. Do our disabled veterans deserve worse treatment from the United States government?
No, they don't.
No, they do not.
Should Congress require VA to presume that every disabled veteran applying for benefits is guilty of fraud?
They shouldn't because they're not.
Should VA force every disabled veteran to fight through copious amounts of paperwork and push through layer upon layer of code, harsh bureaucracy to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, to obtain what are often quite modest disability compensation benefits?
Senator, no.
We must never forget that Congress and VA have worked hard for many decades to end an unacceptable status quo where the VA benefit system was hostile, combative, and stunningly inefficient. My larger fear is that our committee indulging in efforts to demonize the VA disability benefit system will lead us to creating a harmful guardrails that do reduce improper payments, but at the cost of scores of eligible disabled veterans giving up and abandoning efforts to secure the benefits they earned when they served our country in uniform. Would any of the witnesses testifying on behalf of VSOs like to elaborate on that threat and why criticism of VA trying to instill a culture that seeks the let's get to yes is preferable to a culture that seeks to get to no?
Yeah, so Ryan Gallucci answered that question beautifully.
I like how Duckworth was actually called him out for basically having the privilege and opportunities to go through all these back channel or more elite parts of being a veteran and the opportunities. It was like a pathway paid for him, so not every veteran has that opportunity to go and excel after they get fucked up. You know what I'm saying? For most veterans, it's check in at the VA, take these meds, check in a month. In some cases, it's check in 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months. Oh, therapy's not available because we're short-staffed and blah, 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 blah. It's like, quit attacking veterans and fix the problems with your staffing. I don't know this dude. I really don't know this dude. All I know is what he tells me and what she, knows. She was there with him apparently during their recovery. So he could have had a really hard struggle, a really fight to the top of where he's at right now. And I really don't know what his agenda is, but it will shake the community a little bit when you start talking. It's scary. I mean, it's scary season. It is Halloween, so maybe they're just trying to spook everybody into being trick or treat. My daughter and my ex-wife now have therapy because of the VA failures here in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you're gonna still like blame the veterans though? You're gonna blame the veterans? Like, how is it not a failure on the doctor that fucking bailed and cut and run and just left? You know, therapy wasn't a thing. You have to wait. You have to wait. All this stuff. Like, I get it. You do. At some point, you need to man up like I did, right? But it's not possible, especially when they're shoving pills and experimental pills down your fucking throat and saying this is going to make you feel better. See if we can get this jump scare.